So we just got done watching the Campfire livestream, which I have to say, without a question, is a massive W for the Diablo 14. And just with these three individuals right here, Joe Shelley, sorry I'm blocking you, but Joe Shelley, Joe Porpora, Adam Fletcher, phenomenal job. Like 10 out of 10, I think this is exactly what the community needed to hear. Exactly. If I had notes to give, the only thing that I would say is, you already hit the nail on the head. Having this level of transparency and this level of communication beforehand would have been much better. Absolutely. You already get that. I'm not here to hammer you over the head, but this is a huge W. For people who didn't watch, I'd like to just give you the bulleted list of things that we got from this communication, kind of in the order that they talked about it, because there's a lot of really great stuff here. The biggest thing, I'm going to give you TLDR right now so that you don't have to watch the entire video if you don't want. Next week, we are going to be learning about and getting the patch notes for patch 1.1.1, a patch that's looking to directly address the issues that the community has given about the patch that they just released, including how they are addressing very specifically things like Barbarian and the Sorceress. After that, and just in general, getting patch notes basically a week before they come out is something that Adam Fletcher promised here in this discussion, which is phenomenal. That is like such a better total amount of time for the community to be able to digest changes that are coming down the line. Shortly after that, so within the next week or a couple days after, we kind of got two different timelines, either a few weeks or a couple days. After next Friday, we'll get the patch notes for patch 1.1.1. And then a few days after that, theoretically, the patch goes live on season 1. So we're not going to have to wait an entire season or a ridiculous amount of time or a month or even halfway into the season before a lot of the key issues that were brought up are addressed. So that is just phenomenal. If that's the only thing that you took away from here, that's really all you need to know. So I'm going to block Joe Shelley. I apologize. You're the dopest man, but you also kind of look the most tired. It looks like all these guys have been grinding out for a ridiculous amount of time. And as somebody who used to work in software development and also customer facing relationships, I know these facial expressions well, so I definitely feel for them. But I'm just going to cover you up real quick because this is the notes in case anybody just wants to look at them and not listen to me ramble. First, they straight up said how they handled this patch was bad. Mostly the fact that they kind of just dropped it on us and then dropped this season. Their general approach, like I said a little bit previously, is that they want to get the patch notes about everything that they currently have, whether or not it's like a perfect list or even everything that they intend to put in, literally everything that they have 1 week before a patch is supposed to go live. They want to get it into our hands. We also basically got a commitment that they're never going to be doing a patch like that again. They're never just going to be like, look, here's a giant nerf hammer, deal with it, and then here's your season. They're just not going to use this approach moving forward. And your question might be, why did they ever do it in the past? I don't know, man. I'm not omniscient. A lot of things happen. Times get tough. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not here to apologize for them. I'm just saying none of us are perfect, but I appreciate this promise to it, and I just hope that people can kind of accept that and move on in general. Joe Porpora basically hinted at the idea of having new endgame content. Now, obviously, we've all been asking for new endgame content, and they basically said that Nightmare Dungeons were never supposed to be the thing that proved whether or not your build was like a super alpha, Sigma Chad build. Nightmare Dungeons were supposed to just be another part of the endgame progression, as opposed to the only endgame. And they specifically pointed to the fact that a new type of endgame content that is meant to be a build defining, challenging amount of content that will also be tied into leaderboards. And what is considered to be the competition in Diablo 4 is down the pipeline and is a season 3 commitment for when that type of stuff will be implemented. But this helps to give us some context about what the purposes of Nightmare Dungeons were supposed to be in the first place. And what they basically said was that right now, a Nightmare Dungeon tier 70 was supposed to be the end of the difficulty scaling of Nightmare Dungeons. They made it abundantly clear that Nightmare Dungeon tier 100s are so wildly overtuned for what that content was supposed to have as a challenge that it is just not representative of what the content was supposed to be used for in the first place. But we're getting a hotfix today that's going to address a couple smaller things, but also going to put out a pretty big change to how Nightmare Dungeons scale. What they basically said is that a Nightmare Dungeon tier 100 was supposed to be as difficult as a tier 70 is currently. So what it basically means is that all of our builds that just got nerfed into the ground and people who are still playing in the Eternal Realm are now going to see themselves actually pushing up into potentially Nightmare Dungeon tier 100s, because that's what those relative build scales were supposed to be able to play into. Joe Porpora pointed out that Vulnerable is still looking to be addressed, that just reducing the damage numbers on Vulnerable does not do enough and doesn't go far enough And the primary issue right now is that so many builds are pigeonholed into having to use vulnerable, and that was never the intent. But they also made it abundantly clear that to be able to address vulnerable, to like bring it down to where it is an option as opposed to the only option, they also need to reinvestigate how critical strike damage scales with builds, as well as overpower. And that's why you see me in all caps here. They like vaguely hinted at how overpower works in the game in general, and the fact that they need to readdress this, which is what I'm almost certainly like the most excited about. The concept of having every different damage type that your character could build into being a legitimate identity, as well as actually having equal weights to it. Like, sure, there's always going to be one that's like the best, but how much better the best is determines how fun the rest of them are for piloting. So I'm really excited to see that. They gave us these 4 different ideologies about how they want to be approaching the game. And while this absolutely might be what they were doing previously, they kind of hammered on the fact that like these are their driving decision makers and that they're trying to hold to these concepts whenever they're making a decision, whenever possible. First one, always having a wide variety of viable builds to discover, put together, and optimize across all 5 classes. This idea kind of builds into, if they're going to ever nerf something that a class can do, they will only ever pair that with buffing things that the class couldn't do previously. So the idea is that you will always be searching for the new differences in classes and what they can do, the different builds, etc. But it's never just going to be that they're going to take away all the toys and not give us new toys to play with. New items and powers every season to keep game fresh and increase build variety. I think they're already succeeding at doing that. Honestly, in the season journey in season 1, the fact that they added really hard to find aspects to a new seasonal codex of power, and the fact that you get in the seasonal journey, I think they knocked that out of the park. And some people were asking in chat, like whether or not they were willing to give more aspects and more legendaries and more unique items. I don't personally think that just flooding every season with a bunch of these items is exactly the play. It's just that every single item that you do add needs to be fun. It needs to have a value. So that kind of ties into this ideology here. The third one was continually evolving endgame content with high monster density for powerful builds to mow down and activities to challenge your build. So this plays more into this idea that they're going to be increasing density in Helltide and Nightmare Dungeons, the 2 only fun things to do in the game currently. And on top of that, always adding new endgame content, which is a promise that they're currently making here. Again, this is something that supposedly is coming in season 2. We knew season 1 wasn't going to really have any new endgame content. They straight up said that to us because they just did not have that ready. And again, I just like the transparency. I like the fact that they are actively communicating this and making this promise so that we can hold them accountable for it when we hit season 2 and make sure that they're delivering on it, right? And then last, make the game more fun for players. This was something that they kind of touched on, right? They can't really give specifics about this idea of just making it more fun, but they agreed that this nerf didn't make the game more fun. And while they still think that some of the things need to happen, they talked about cooldown reduction. They stood behind the fact that cooldown reduction was too powerful in the game. And I think if we give them the credit where credit's due, it absolutely was, right? Being able to spam ultra powerful skills all of the time meant that the Barbarian always had to use 3 shouts and also permanently had the benefit of all 3 shouts. That is just literally too strong if you're willing to have like an objective stance on it. Kind of tying into the idea of giving us more toys, they said every decision that they make should be seeking to increase fun. That can mean that builds get nerfed and builds get buffed, but it should never be a net negative in fun. It looks like they're finally pushing the big red button. At the very least, they're giving us 1 additional stash tab. They also talked about the fact that they are still investigating different ways of handling the UI and making stashes better in general, but at the very least, we're getting 1 of them. So it's like, now you can have 1 less mule, GG, seems pretty decent. And a much bigger change, or at least a much bigger change for me, is that they're actually allowing elixirs to stack all the way up to 99. So if you've been hyper farming Helltide and saving all your elixirs, you know you have a ton of stacks of these in your inventory right now. I basically have half a stash tab that's just valuable elixirs, and then being able to stack up to 99 is at least going to help cut that down. They're looking to reduce respec costs across the board by 40%. They touched on the XP nerfs, and they didn't give us exact specifics here. We're going to get more specifics next week with patch 1.1.1, but they want to make leveling from 50 to 100 faster. Basically, they said the changes to experience were mostly to stop people from being able to jump into a dungeon with their level 100 buddy, stand at the front of the dungeon, and then get hyper power farm for 2 to 3 hours and immediately be in the end game. The flip side of it, though, is that they realize that this does have a negative impact on people's more casual ability to be able to hit level 100 or just get high into the 80s and 90s. So they want to make it so very specifically leveling through that part of the game 50 to 100 is addressed and is faster. They touched on uber unique drop rates, and while they did not say, hey, we're just going to make this super easy to get, they lightly hinted at the fact that they're looking to slightly increase their drop rates. They didn't give us a specific about this, but they agreed that crowd control in general in Diablo 4 is just too black and white, is just too powerful coming in from monsters. And they want to address this by giving players more tools for handling it. And that's really all that we got out of Joe Shelley. But at the very least, they see it, they hear it, and they are working on it. They talked about loadouts, like the idea of being able to just swap from one build to another build for cost. And while their teams are talking about it and UI is looking at it, it did not sound like they're actively developing this functionality, so I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. Similarly, for loot filters, working on it, thinking about it, making it so that like loot is more valuable in general. No specifics, no time soon, I would imagine. A big thing that wasn't immediately obvious was that they intend to be rolling out more substantial patches throughout this season prior to season 2. So this isn't just going to be 1.1.1 to fix the preseason nerfs and then like deal with it hot fixes from there on out. Legitimate patches are coming down the line to address things in the game that are like much bigger than in systemic than just like individual small changes, and that will continue to roll throughout the season. I'm glad to hear that. Somebody asked about group finders, and they basically said kind of working on buffing up social tools in the game. I think right now there are no social tools in the game, just if we're being honest with ourselves. You can't really talk to a world chat, you really can't trade in game. There's just nothing. There minimum needs to be an auction host. There needs to be in-game trading that I can like go to a thing, interact with people. I need to be able to find groups. I need to be able to find guilds. And that just doesn't exist in the game right now. So they said that they're working on it. Again, nothing specific. I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. Touched on the concepts of things that kill players at a higher rate than they intended. So this includes exploding when you die, chill effects leading to death, the charging bugs, which they said out loud here, yes, they recognize as bugs, and they are being fixed. So if you didn't know, like a charging monster could still hit you with their charge and kill you after that monster was dead. If you pulled a monster, or if you CC'd a monster who had started a charge effect and then touched them, it still counted as charging and would instant kill you. So that's a bug that's being addressed. And then also dungeon affixes, which are leading to greater than like a disproportionate number of player deaths. They're looking to address all of these. Again, no particulars, but this sounded a little bit sooner rather than later. Somebody asked about being able to put aspects that you get into your Codex of Power. They also said that like, yes, they're looking into ways to mitigate how many aspects you need to hold in your stash, but didn't give us any specifics there. They said that the rework for resistances was coming in season 2. I don't remember if they had already promised for season 2. In my brain, they had said season 3. This one was a little bit interesting. Somebody asked about reintroducing campaign bosses as random bosses in dungeons, because obviously the Andariel fight is super cool. The Duriel fight was super cool once they fixed it, and we just haven't seen them again, especially now that we're skipping the campaign. And basically Joe Shelley got real squirrely all of a sudden and said he couldn't really speak to it right now. But it really seems like campaign bosses are coming either as part of his new content or a boss rush, or maybe some of this challenging content that Joe Papora was referring to. Nothing specific. But you could tell the way that he was kind of saying, he was like, well, we are definitely looking at opportunities for that. The body language to me said like, this is something that like they're working on actively and are probably hoping to roll out as a very cool big thing, as a new type of endgame content, which I'm super excited about. Very specifically talking about minions in the game, they kind of just like trailed off onto Druid companions in particular, which are kind of just trash city right now. And what they basically said was that the Druid doesn't have the same type of ways of interacting with their companions as a Necromancer has with their skeletons. Now, I think that minions across the board are still just kind of trash, but that's a whole other conversation. But they are saying that they're looking for more ways to be able to give the Druid tools to be able to interact with their companions and empower them in more meaningful ways. And then the last thing that they touched on was the idea of treasure goblins. One, they kind of hinted back to Diablo 3 with all the different types of treasure goblins, and in general, just looking to see if there's a way of implementing like treasure goblin diversity, and then on top of that, actually buffing their drops. I personally think that treasure goblins are like pretty dope. Like I'm always excited when I kill one and I get a legendary. I'm like, sick, I killed one monster, got a legendary, feels great. But some people say that they're still underwhelming, and they agree. So they're going to be buffing their drops. So that's really dope. All in all, again, I think that this was just a huge W. I think the messaging was great. I think the way they present everything was phenomenal. I think the sincerity, I mean, like, look at these dudes right here. If you can't tell, those are the looks of faces of people who have been dragged through the mud while fighting to keep their heads above the water. I've been in this position before, so I definitely feel for them. But I think the whole thing was a huge W. If you walked away from this like unfulfilled, I quite literally think that you have like unreal expectations. You know, I know I'm going to get flamed down in the comments, but sincerely, this was great. I think that they did a great job. I think they truly addressed the things that people were saying and not just kind of like skimmed off of them or tried to say like, oh, we hear you, you know, we have things in When they had specifics to give us, they gave us specifics. When they had deliverables to give us, they gave us deliverables. When they honestly could not give us an answer, they said outright, we physically cannot give you an answer right now. And if like literal pure transparency is not good enough, I don't know what is. But I think this was great for them. It was great for us. Gives us a ton of insight into how they are approaching the game and also how we can temper our expectations. And ultimately, that's all we can really ask for. But thank you very much. I hope that this helped you to digest it in a little bit of a better way, or at least saved you some time from watching the entire thing. I really appreciate you checking out the video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.